So what is a network anyway? So a network is a bunch of devices connected to each other. There's a lot of different components that make up a network. So you kind of have your normal little Ethernet cable here that's got the little plug on each end. You plug it into your home router or your home switch. From then you have switches. We'll try to keep this basic, but most of you have probably seen the blinky lights on these guys, whether it's in your office or you've been on a data center tour or you've just seen pictures on the internet. And then you have routers, and these are basically the air traffic controllers of the internet. Those are the main core components. We can get into a million other subcomponents there, but those are the three things you really need to understand, the physical components that make up a network. From there, you might say, well, how fast is the network? Well, there's lots of different types of switches out there and devices that can connect to them. Many, many eons ago, you could go as slow as 10 megabits on an Ethernet connection. These days, typically you don't see much less than 100 megabit and even 1 gigabit per second as sort of the standard network speed. However, when you get to the cloud, those are way too slow for the internet to actually operate. So most cloud providers have minimum of 10 gigabits per second of connectivity to multiple providers. And what's so cool about the internet? Well, there's a gazillion different connection points and ways to get from one place to another. So we call that redundancy. So in a cloud data center, you'll typically see at least two of everything. And we talked about that in the data center infrastructure from a cooling and power perspective. Not much different in the networking. So if you think of this as our kind of core routers in a data center or a cloud network, we connect out to, let's say, Cox and Level 3 and Sprint and AT&T. And that's just kind of a random example of different network providers that you would connect to create the cloud network. So way down here, you have your little computer in your office network. Well, you've got all these different ways to get out to the internet. So it's highly resilient, highly redundant. From there, you really want to talk about, well, what's the important things to know if you move all your stuff to the cloud? Well, there's two concepts that are very key. One is called bandwidth. I think most of you probably have heard this before. When you sign up for your cable modem service at home, they claim speeds up to 1 gigabit per second or super fast internet to your house. And that's important, right? You want to have enough bandwidth to be able to watch those Netflix videos and whatever else you might be doing on the internet. But the key thing here that's very important, especially in the business world, is latency, right? And the main difference is bandwidth is like the size of a highway, right? So if you're in LA and you're sitting on the 405, that's a huge highway, 6, 8, 10 lanes of traffic. If you're in Vermont, you might be on this tiny little 2-lane road out in the country. So if you think of the size of the highways as the bandwidth, well, the latency is how many stinking semis are on this thing clogging up the traffic on this 405 freeway in LA. It's great that they have 10 lanes, but if it's full of cars and you're sitting there in rush hour, all the bandwidth in the world doesn't solve that problem. So the speed at which you're traveling on that highway is really controlled by the latency or how many other people are also using it. Conversely, over here on this 2-lane road out in the country, you could be riding your cool little motorcycle 150 miles an hour and have plenty of bandwidth to do what you're trying to do. So let's not confuse bandwidth as being the most important thing. It's certainly important, but it's very important to measure latency as well. And so you want to be very closely connected to the devices in which you've moved to the cloud. And that's why it's important to ask those questions when you're talking to a cloud provider about networking and connectivity.